A few months ago, I made a video about the British hover train, and it got me thinking, what happened to hovercraft? Well, I reached out to the Hovercraft Museum, and they very kindly invited me down on a day they're usually closed to show you this, the world's largest passenger hovercraft. You see, unlike the hover train, hovercraft did take off, pardon the pun. So with my plan off the ground, I reached out to Hovertravel, who run the UK's last remaining passenger hovercraft service. And they said, yeah, come down, but they challenged something that I'd written stupidly in my brief, which was the rise and fall of passenger hovercraft. So this video investigates that and looks at what actually happened to hovercraft. The ideas behind hovercraft have been around since, I kid you not, the early 1700s, but there just wasn't the technology to build them. The idea was they were fast and they could travel over land or sea or pretty much anything as long as it was flat. The first actual hovercraft was invented by Christopher Cockerell, and it first crossed the channel in 1959. And from there it was only 6 years until we got our first regular passenger service between Southsea and Ryde on the Isle of Wight. Suddenly, everyone wanted to make everything into hovercraft. Hover cars, hover trains, hover lawnmowers. But the biggest addition to the hovercraft collection was this, the Princess Anne. This thing is a beast.
So behind me is the Princess Anne hovercraft, one of two Mark III hovercraft. Around 1969, this craft came into operational service. It was built on the Isle of Wight, taken down to Dover, and then was on the Dover-Calais crossing under the company called Seaspeed.
It worked so well for this route because it's a short sea crossing, and also you've got sandbanks over on the Calais side, and that's where hovercraft sort of come into their own really on the shallows like that.
This thing was really, really fast. Its official fastest crossing from Dover to Calais, that's 21 miles, was 22 minutes, but unofficially it was said to have crossed in as little as 19. But it also required a lot of energy. It was over 16,000 horsepower, and each of its 4 Rolls-Royce engines drank over 1,000 litres of jet fuel every hour. Here's a bit about how they worked.
Hovercraft use a lot of air. Big fans spinning, producing air, forced down into the skirt, which you see behind me, which inflates and pushes the hull up into the air. And for propulsion and movement, this craft has 4 21-foot diameter propellers on the roof, which enable the craft to do 360s, backwards, forwards, sideways, any movement you want. Right, I will go in. Now, I've not done this for a while because I've sort of grown a bit since I was last an engineer on board. So here I am sat next to a lift fan. These would normally spin at around 600 revolutions a minute, sucking the air down and blowing it through into the skirt. If I just give this a small push, it still goes. That's not bad after 25 years.
When it launched, it was the largest hovercraft ever built, but it turns out it still wasn't big enough.
The craft are big, basically because these were designed to carry passengers and cars. So in the early days, around 30 cars and about 290 passengers. Well, they looked at the obviously the takings, and they thought, well, how do we carry more of this craft?
The craft was actually cut in two, and it was literally cut the craft in half and had a large section in the middle, which increased the passenger and car carrying capacity, and only a small amount increase on the fuel costs for that. To get an idea of just how big the piece was that was inserted, if you look up onto the beams up there, 5 along here, 6, you've got 7, 701, 702. So from here to Lyndon, that's the section that was actually inserted into both this craft and her sister craft, the Princess Margaret.
The SRN4s ran for decades, but a perfect metaphorical storm was brewing, and the final nail in the coffin would ground the hovercraft for good in just over a year. Before I tell you what that is, I want to thank Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this portion of the video, which has helped make the whole thing possible. Recently I've been traveling a lot, more on that in a future video, but when it comes to online platforms like streaming services, you can't always get the same access when you're abroad. On top of that, websites load versions locally to where you are, and sometimes you might even be at home but want to access something as if you were abroad. Surfshark is an award-winning virtual private network. Once you've installed it, they direct all of your web traffic through their virtual private network wherever you are in the world, meaning you can travel virtually, no hovercraft needed, and add an extra layer of protection from things like targeted ads. They've got 3,000 VPN locations in over 100 countries, any of which you can choose as your location. And one thing I like about Surfshark is that it doesn't matter how many devices you have, you can put it on all of them with just one account. Another thing that I like about Surfshark is that they've given viewers of this channel a special offer. So head to surfshark.com/LukeO or use the code LukeO at checkout to get 4 months extra Surfshark VPN. The service was massively popular, but that said, it wasn't popular with everyone.
The hovercraft was popular, mainly for its speed. Not so popular with people who were seasick. The ride could be very bad if you were sat at the front. These are all the original seats from the last days of service. Currently the curtains have been taken down for cleaning, but here was quite bumpy on a rough day because you're at the front of the craft and you got the full impact of the 16-foot waves. Good fun though.
It was loud, yes. Big props up top. So it was mainly the prop noise that you heard.
The props, their tips are spinning just under the speed of sound. So if you were down at Dover in the hoverport, you could hear the props noise bouncing off all the cliffs. The wonderful residents of the Gateway Flats often put complaints in.
Anyway, so remember those thousands of litres of jet fuel required every hour to operate these craft? Well, that was starting to become a problem. You see, almost half of their operating costs were fuel. So when fuel prices rose, their operating profit disappeared. One way they counteracted this was through sales of duty-free items. Since there was no tax, things were much cheaper on board than they were in the shops. At points, a significant number of people were actually just booking trips to stock up on cheap drinks and tobacco, and these sales helped offset the massive operational costs. So in 1999, when the EU banned duty-free shopping between EU member countries, that income dried up, and suddenly the numbers stopped adding up. Add into the equation the launch of the Channel Tunnel, which was essentially doing the same route, and things weren't looking good for the service. With the end of duty-free and the opening of the Channel Tunnel, the service was no longer viable. So with that came the decision to close the service on the 1st of October 2000. But remember, that was just one service. And today, Hovertravel service is still running.
Today we're in Hovertravel's terminal in the South Sea. This is where the hovercraft lands and departs and takes people to the Isle of Wight.
These craft carry people from South Sea to Ryde in just under 10 minutes. They use the same principles of lift fans and propellers, but with some updates.
Our craft are a lot more cost effective because they only work for a very short period of time. They get up to optimum temperature and they work very efficiently because the crossing's less than 10 minutes. Previously also, our hovercraft had 4 engines and now they only have 2.
Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Hovertravel.
We're taking off.
About this time. In the afternoon, you will be instructed to put on the life jacket and remain past the station. The crew will assess and activate.
And there you go, we're on the water. The crazy thing is that you don't actually feel the transition from land to water. It's just hovering.
Who will assist those who require it.
This is so cool. My brain just cannot process that we are actually hovering above the water right now. These new craft don't use jet fuel, they use marine diesel. Since they seem so futuristic, it's easy to forget that the SRN4s actually launched in 1968. So Hovertravel's current fleet have learned from 50 years of development.
The hovercraft works so well in this area because Ryde Sands actually stretches out into the Solent a mile. So at low tide, you can't get a boat that close into Ryde. That's why they built a pier. So our hovercraft can just leave Southsea and glide across the water and then glide across the Sounds right into the centre of Ryde.
You can see out there how long the pier is that you'd have to go down to get the boat. That's because all of this, when the water drains out, is sand. Just to emphasise how fast this journey is, it would be quicker to get from one side to the other on this hovercraft than it will be to watch this whole video. We're coming into land.
We would like to thank you for travelling.
And there you go. We're in the Isle of Wight. It feels like getting off the shortest plane journey ever. Thank you.
My name's Steve Attrill. I'm the Director of Marine Operations and the Chief Pilot here at Hovertravel. And behind us here is Griffin Hoverworks 12,000 hovercraft. The craft is built as an aluminium boat principally, with side decks extending from it to hang the skirt on. And at the bottom of the skirt, of the main loop of the skirt, there are things we call fingers, segments of rubber that are very flexible, and they enable the craft to traverse the land or the sea and flex over the surface that we're operating over to minimise drag. Towards the stern of the craft, you've got our lift fan packs. There are 2 engines on board. Each engine drives a propeller and a lift fan pack.
One of the changes they made with the propellers, they put them inside these ducts, which make them more energy efficient. They also don't spin quite so close to the speed of sound, which makes them a lot quieter when they're running.
The duct reduces the external noise levels, but it also makes the whole propulsion system, propeller, more efficient. The propeller turns relatively slowly in hovercraft terms. When you look at some of the earlier hovercraft, particularly in the case of like the SRM4 hovercrafts, they had very big propellers. If the tip speeds are getting close to the speed of sound, they would be very noisy.
Balancing old hovercraft wasn't easy either. You had to manually adjust fans and propellers. There's even stories of people having to move freight around inside of the hovercraft to keep it balanced. On these new ones, it does it all automatically.
As the hovercraft accelerates away, the drag on the skirt fingers is relatively low. As we increase speed, so that drag increases, the hovercraft actually tries to trip over itself. Each of the 4 corners of the craft, there are 4 tanks, they're water tanks, and we transfer the water between the tanks to keep the craft on an even keel. There's a lot of developments in that area that were going on that perhaps people don't necessarily realise.
Since 2020, the NHS has integrated the hovercraft into their emergency response system because it's faster to get someone on a stretcher to a hospital on the mainland using hovercraft than it is to use an air ambulance. And in 2024, a similar Griffin-built hovercraft launched in Japan, the world's first new passenger hovercraft service in over 50 years. It's a sign that we might have only seen the beginning of the hovercraft story. They're still around, still progressing, and still absolutely awe-inspiring. Even just a quick look at the 2 cockpits, and you can see just how much has changed in 50 years. All in all, these hovercraft aren't built to break records. They're built to prove that hovercraft can be practical, reliable, and efficient.
Hovercraft are used around the world for a variety of other things. So oil exploration, for coast guarding, for border patrols, for defence, and for search and rescue. They can work in a multitude of environments: ice, sand, across land, across water, across swamp. So the future of hovercraft has got to be looking at how they can become more environmentally friendly. Would it be electric? Would it be a different type of fuel? Hopefully a biofuel. And that would be something that Hovertravel would look to adopt in its next iteration of its fleet.
Far from a rise and fall, hovercraft have just settled into the roles they were built for. And in those roles, they outperform pretty much any other vehicle, able to literally hover above almost anything. It's not every day you get to jump on a hovercraft as a practical form of transport. That is, unless it's your commute, which for some people, it actually is.